for your generous time here and answering some questions. First of all, can you tell me how did you become a dog trainer slash dog whisperer, and when?
It's a gift. I've been blessed ever since I was a child with being able to communicate with dogs. You know, when I was a kid and the dog would chase the kids down the street, the dogs would always run past me and I would wonder why. After a while, I figured out it was energy, all energy. And then I developed the language of dogs, and I've been doing it ever since I've been about 8 years old.
And professionally, when did you start your business?
Professionally, I started about, let's say, 8 years ago. Funny story, we used to be a software engineer. They used to fly us around in this little Gulf jet or this little, whatever they call it, Lear jet. I thought I was high and mighty, so we land back in Pontiac Airport. I go to the vice president's office when I get back, and he says, guess what? We sold the company to a Japanese company and we're laying 60% of the people off, and you're one of those 60%. I said, hey, it was lovely working here. Thanks for the opportunity. You guys have a great day. And I decided to do what I was born to do, which was to work with dogs, to help dogs live, to help owners help their dogs live, and general dog training.
And how many dogs have you worked with?
I'm assuming 2,500 to 3,000 dogs, roughly.
Watching some of your videos on YouTube, I was really amazed that some of them have about 4 million views. How did you grow such a following?
You know, that's curious. To make it short and sweet, I think that we grew a lot of the following because our methodologies work. I mean, no one would have ever thought that a dog has a language. No one would ever have thought if you talk to the dog in its language, you would have a perfect dog. To be quite honest with you, I think that we impact by the training, the way we train, and just the general knowledge that does work. So we get a lot of hits, and I'm very proud of it.
You've spoken about being an expert for defense in court of dogs and matters of dog bites. Can you give talk a little bit about how you help them?
You know what, when we go into the courtroom with a dog, it seems like everybody has a counselor except the dog, okay? There's a reason why dogs do things. There's a reason why dogs bite. There's a reason why dogs run away. By having an advocate for a dog, you're able to present their side of the story. And then we can get a more overall view of what happened and how we got to that point. So basically, I am a dog advocate, and I really enjoy what I do because it's the first time that dogs have someone to speak for them in the courtroom.
You stated that reasonable control can only be achieved when a dog is leashed. Why is that?
Reasonable control is not if you can't get to a dog. If a dog is unleashed, it can close on an object 30 feet away in 2 seconds. From my point of view, reasonable control is when you have the dog on leash. My personal opinion is there's absolutely no reasonable control if the dog isn't on the leash. Just like the two little girls in Detroit. What a perfect example of reasonable control. What a perfect example of reasonable control if the leashes had been on. And in addition to that, we talk about people having reasonable control over their leashes. What we also want to take into consideration is that we're protecting the owners. We're protecting every one of the people who may not look at this law or passing this law as great. We're actually protecting them. Brother, I've seen some horrible things go on in the courtroom too. People lose everything because their dog bit someone and they didn't have homeowners insurance. It's not reasonable control when you're not a dog expert and you don't particularly know what will affect a dog, what will make a dog run, what will make a dog aggressive, what will make a dog dominant. So there really is no reasonable control. I think the word reasonable is not a good word. I would rather have something that says absolute control. Because there is no reasonable. Unless you have absolute control, you're going to have a problem. Reasonable control basically means it's reasonably certain that someone's not going to get mauled to death. As opposed to absolutely a person will not get mauled to death. We don't want to leave reasonable, that room, because there is no room in dog behavior. When they become aggressive, they're going to bite.
And in the same vein, people say, my dog has never bit anyone, my dog has never done this. Is there instances where any dog can be spooked or surprised to get them to attack?
All dogs can bite or will bite under certain circumstances. It's not true for 90% of the dogs, but the problem is it's true for 10% of the dogs, okay? And in addition to that, when let's say a bad dog gets into it with a dog or a human, and because there are other dogs around, you know, you have to understand that when dogs get into these situations where they get aggressive and they start attacking, they're also talking to the other dogs around them in their language, saying join into the attack. That's why when you go to the dog park and two dogs get into a fight, you notice that they all come in. This is instinct to a dog. There is no reasonable control over instinct, that's what I'm trying to say.
Can you give some of the problems with shock collars? They're saying that might be an alternative to having a leash. Is it's okay to have a shock collar on a dog as opposed to being leashed?
When two dogs are within 5 to 10 feet of each other and that prong goes off, it's most probable that the other dog's going to believe that it was bitten by the other dog. So that's where the problem is. If I could think of the absolute worst control over a dog, it would be the shock collar. If you use a shock collar as a training tool, that's totally different. You're actually giving beep commands, vibration commands, and in some rare cases, you may have to use mild stimulation, okay? That's what the shock collar is used for, to tell the dog when it's doing something right or when it's doing something wrong. If a dog is in a state of frenzy and aggression, it's not going to understand anything. It's going forward. At that point, the only way that you're going to stop the dog is by some forcible interaction when you remove the dog, let's say, off of a victim. And there is no reasonable control because you still can't get your dog back to you. Now, if you're a master with a shock collar, you still won't be able to get that reasonable control in a high, tense, dominant, aggressive situation. It's just the absolute wrong thing to ever use to have reasonable control over a dog. Period.
There's an argument that says dogs need to run to get adequate exercise. Can a dog just walking get adequate exercise?
So I guess the conundrum is physical exercise versus intellectual exercise. If people think that exercise of a dog is going to stop the aggression of the dog, they're wrong. Any expert will tell you that. Okay? Exercising an aggressive dog may make a dog more tired, and they may not become aggressive because they're just too tired, but in many cases they'll just become a quarter aggressive, a half aggressive, because they're worn out. In other words, aggression is not stopped by exercise. However, aggression will always be stopped if you utilize intellectual exercise, as we talked about. Sit and stay, training the dog, walking with your dog, things of that nature. So that old saying that if your dog isn't exercised, it's going to be aggressive, that's not true. A dog is like a human. They are born who they are. If they're born aggressive, they're going to be aggressive. If they're born dominant, they're going to be a dominant and always stay dominant. The only difference with a human when they're aggressive or dominant, they can control it, okay, on the intellectual level within themselves, whereas a dog has to be corrected in order to change their behavior. So that's an absolute myth. Now, that does not mean that you don't exercise your dog. It's always good to exercise your dog. But if you're thinking that that's going to cure your problem, it doesn't. And I think everybody will agree, if you think about it, it doesn't work as far as settling the dog down, other than the dog being maybe tired for about 20 or 30 minutes to lay down and then get up and start acting out again, okay? An absolute myth.
There's an opinion given that a dog park is the worst place to bring a dog to exercise. I know our dog park has a separate area for small dogs and large dogs. Is there a positive aspect to dog parks?
Here's the thing with dog parks. I don't particularly love dog parks, okay, for a lot of particular reasons. However, dog parks serve a purpose. Dog parks were made to be in a city type environment, and the reason that they made them is because they want dogs to come there that are safe. And how do they achieve this? They have rules and regulations. They have someone there to look at your dog, or if your dog comes in, to notice your dog, or if the dog is not ready for the dog park, you can even call the police. But you have some mechanism of filtering the dogs through before they come in. In addition, you know, for example, when dogs use the bathroom, you have flies. Flies carry germs. Well, in the dog park, you have people to make sure that people pick up their poop, okay? You know, for example, at the dog park, you have people to make sure that they have their correct paperwork for their dog, that they have all their vaccinations. So the dog park was created to minimize harm, to minimize things that can hurt you. For example, at the dog park, if a dog is acting like a maniac, someone will come over and say, you gotta leave because your dog's gonna hurt someone, okay? In a makeshift dog park, for example, that's different. The reason that they have a regular dog park is so you don't have to have a makeshift dog park where you can't control which dogs come in. If you have an aggressive dog, you know it, you take the dog to, let's say, a makeshift dog park or even a regular dog park, it will happen. The dog is going to create some type of problem, whether it's something simple or whether it's something that requires municipals or hospitals. That's why they have the dog park. I don't particularly like the dog park, but at least you have some control over whether someone's going to get hurt, harmed, or killed. If we talked about the person getting bit, we talked about the children getting bit, but we've never talked about the other victims in this case, the dog. The dog is always the victim. You see, they're the ones that get killed because their owner didn't want to put a leash on. Just think about it. That dog has to die because it bit someone. The owner knew that it was aggressive, but the owner didn't put a leash on the dog. At that point, you're putting a dog's life in the hands of someone who's irresponsible because they knew that the dog was aggressive. This guy here, I'm going to tell you something. This beautiful little dog would not be here if it wasn't for a leash. You see, people think that this leash law is for this, that, or whatever. Sometimes you got to think outside the box. I'm a leash guy. I'm a dog whisperer. And my dog never goes out without a leash. Why? Because I have to be in control over the dog's safety. I have to be in control over another dog's safety or another human safety. Even though I don't feel that my dog is that type of dog, I still have a responsibility. Tell you a little story. This little bugger goes out to the lake, drops in the lake. I'm looking for her, I go out there, I see her head peeping out of the lake. So I go out there like a dummy, you know, I'm the big bag dog whisperer, and I fall through the ice. So thank God I was in the Marine Corps, and I knew I went through water survival training and cold weather training, and I was able to get up onto the ice, prone position where all my weight wasn't on the ice. The only reason this dog is alive is because the leash was on. The only reason this dog is alive is because I always make a point to have a leash on the dog for safety reasons. Because the leash was on, the leash came up out of the water onto the ice, and I did not have to crawl 4 feet back over to get the dog. I just grabbed the leash and pulled the dog out. So sometimes when we look at variables that are entered into this leash law, it's also about the life or the harm of a young child or an adult. It's also about these guys getting put down because the owner didn't have a leash on.
Thanks so much for your time again and your expertise. And one last question is, if you could finish this sentence, if you love your dog.
If you love your dog, put a leash on your dog.